I can say for sure is that it's a catastrophe for every family that has suffered an injury or death because of the most recent fighting. And it's a catastrophe if a family has to pull up stakes and flee their home. We've seen pictures of thousands of families, many with elderly members and children, leaving the area of fighting and going to public spaces, public parks, or open fields to try to seek shelter. And, you know, the scope of it, catastrophe, we may be heading in that direction, but certainly it's a crisis for every one of those families.
And could you describe a bit more in detail about the kind of conditions that are facing these displaced Afghans who've had to flee their homes?
Well, anytime a family leaves because of conflict, that conflict comes to their doorstep quite quickly. And they're often not prepared to leave as fast as they need to. So a family grabs what they can. That might be money, that might be papers, but they don't have time to properly prepare. They don't have time to properly pack. And many of these families, of course, in Afghanistan are not well off. They don't have a lot of resources. And so if you could imagine going on the run for safety, and then you have to tackle the question, how do I feed my family? Well, you had to leave so quickly. You didn't bring any food. You didn't bring any cooking utensils. And the little money you might have, then you have to use to feed your family on a daily basis. But it's not a very economically advantageous way to feed your family. So that's just, for example, one of the problems these families will be facing.
Now, could you tell us a bit more about what the situation is currently like for Afghan government forces and local militia who have been tasked with fighting back the Taliban?
Well, I couldn't speak to what their task is. What the International Committee of the Red Cross does, and by the way, speaks to both sides in the conflict, is tries to make sure that the fighting forces do everything they can to limit the damage to civilian infrastructure and to civilians themselves. So we're asking both sides to make sure, or to avoid as much as they can, any damage to electrical systems or to water systems, to move the fighting away from populated areas. You should take the example of just one type of weapon, a mortar. A mortar is not a very precise weapon. So when a mortar is used in and around civilian areas, it has a high potential to cause civilian damage. So those are the kinds of conversations we're having with the fighting forces.
So you're saying that you're speaking to both sides. If the Taliban were to take Kabul, how will organizations like yours be able to get help to the injured, to the internally displaced there?
Well, we'll continue to have communications with whatever sides there are in the conflict, and we'll emphasize the need for medical care, medical assistance for anyone who's been wounded. And that, by the way, includes soldiers and fighters on any side, but also, of course, civilians. Civilians are bearing the brunt of the casualties that we are seeing. Just to offer you some numbers, the first 9 days of this month, our medical centers around the country treated 4,000 people wounded in conflict. And I want to reemphasize that, not just 4,000 people who may have been ill, but 4,000 people wounded in conflict.
And how are you right now able to get aid to the people that need it, given the fast-moving situation on the ground?
So we at the International Committee of the Red Cross are really concentrating right now on medical assistance. We're supporting 15 different medical clinics around the country. We have long been present, in particular in the two large hospitals in southern Afghanistan, in Helmand, in the capital of Helmand province, and the capital of Kandahar province. Those medical facilities are flooded with patients right now. So the medical teams are under a lot of strain. They're working as hard as they can, but we have supplies, of course, and we'll continue to supply those places. But right now, the concern is the high number of patients that we're seeing.